All right, boys and girls, we're going to talk today about multiplication. And when you get into fifth grade, a lot of it is just a continuation from what you've learned in fourth grade, and really even all the way back to third grade as well. Um, so I can start this video off with this. If you want to do well with multiplication over the next week or so, um, one of the biggest things I could give you advice on is learning those facts. If you don't know your multiplication facts, you're going to be really struggling with this concept and with many concepts to come in fifth grade. Because as we get further into the year, especially when we get into fractions, if you don't know your multiplication facts, you're going to be really behind. And so I would strongly suggest that you start taking some time and practicing facts on a daily basis until you have them down. I always tell kids, even the ones that think that they have them, you still could use practice. I mean, nobody truly has them mastered. You can always go and get more practice in, even us as teachers. And so, strongly suggest that if you know that you have an issue with multiplication facts, you've got to find something that can help you out with that, whether it's just getting some flashcards, playing games online, whatever it might be. You've got to get some help. All right, so I'm going to start this off with kind of some basics, some things that you should know already, but just kind of reviewing a little bit. So I'm going to actually go all the way back to what's called a 2x1. So a lot of times when you're in math class, you're thinking about, 1x1 multiplication facts when you practice them. But as you go or get older and, you get higher up in grades, your multiplication gets a little bit more difficult and you start adding on to it. So, you probably started doing 1x1s, then you went to 2x1s, then probably went to 3x1s. And then last year, you should have gotten up to what's called a 2x2. So today we're going to start with kind of a basic 2x1, work our way back up to a 2x2. So we have that as a refresher. All right, so I'm going to start with this 2x1. I have 24 times 6. So a lot of times when I'm teaching multiplication in my class, I like to break it down and just show you guys what you're actually doing here. And so I'm going to write it out to the side a little differently. I'm going to write this problem as 20 plus 4. Let's see if I can get my pen going here. 20 plus 4 times 6, because essentially this is the problem that you're doing. You could break down, it's kind of like doing an expanded form. You could break down the number 24 to 20 plus 4, but essentially you're timesing both of those numbers by 6. So your first step would be a math fact. 4 times 6 is 24. And then your second step would be going across, multiplying 20 times 6, which that shouldn't be too bad because it has a 0 in it. And so 20 times 6 would be 6 times 2, which is 12, but with a 0 behind it would be 120. And then you take those two products and you add them together. And so 4 plus nothing would be 4, 2 plus 2 is 4, 1 plus nothing is 1, and you'd have this answer of 144. That's all great, and I know sometimes in fourth grade, that's going to be a big push, is to show you multiple ways how to multiply. But a lot of times when you hit fifth grade, we really push for what's called the traditional or the standard algorithm. And so I'm going to show, on the left side of the screen, I'm going to show that. And we should get the same answer. So I'm going to start here, the same thought here. I'm going to start in basically my ones place. I'm going to multiply. It's still going to be the same fact that I have here, which in this case it's going to be 6 times 4. I'm going to carry the 2 this time though. And when I carry the 2, I know that my next step, I'm going to have to go from the ones place with my 6, go across to my 10 here, which would be 6 times 2. 6 times 2 gives me 12, plus an extra 2. 12 plus 2 is 14, and then I'm going to get the same answer of 144. Really, either one of these strategies would be okay. Like I said, though, the majority of the time in fifth grade, your teachers are going to want you to stick to what's called the traditional algorithm, which is going to be the one on the left side of the screen. Get the answers. The answers are the same. I know in my classroom, I kind of push for traditional algorithm. But I also think the beautiful thing about math is there's multiple ways to do things. And a lot of times in my classroom, we talk about those ways, because if you're doing it and you're getting the right answer, a lot of times your teachers, especially me, would not care. We want right answers. We want whatever's making sense to you for it to work. And so I think that this, both ways would be fine, but it would be good. It's I always tell my kids it's good to know both ways, but be prepared for one or the other, because you just never know what a problem might ask for. Okay, on this page we're going to go back to a 3x1. So I'm just going to come up with a problem here, 438, and I'm going to times that by 7. And so I'm going to stick to just traditional on this one. I'm not going to break this one apart like I did on the previous page. And so one of the things that I always like to tell my kids is I like to tell them, hey, let's think before we even start, approaching this problem. Let's think before the pencil hits the paper. And so on something like this, I might ask somebody in my classroom, or I might ask my students, hey, well, what fact do we really need to know? And so essentially what you need to know on this problem is you need to know your sevens, because when you do 438 times 7, you're really just multiplying those top numbers, 4, 3, and 8, all by 7. So if you know your sevens, you'd be really good on this problem, as long as you know the process on how to go get the answer. So I'm going to show something here that I like to do in my classroom, and that is, if you know you're a struggling student when it comes to math facts, you have to come up with strategies. And strategies, maybe on something like this is maybe a kid maybe wouldn't know their sevens. And so I'm going to show it, and this could be a tool that you might want to think about using. But basically, I always show my kids tic-tac-toe with multiplication. So you draw out a basic tic-tac-toe board, and then for this particular example, I'm going to draw 7 dots, because that's the fact I have to deal with on this problem. I have to know my sevens. So what you're doing here is you're basically essentially it just turns into skip counting. But it's something that's quick and easy to do. And I always tell my kids is if you do this and it makes sense to you, then you could put this like in a page in your composition book, and it's there with you the rest of the year. And I like to tell my kids to do that because they're using a resource, and if they can figure out how to do it, then by all means use it. So I'm going to show this one here. So what you do is you just start counting your dots. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so a 7 would go in the first spot there on your tic-tac-toe board. But after that, this is the key if you ever make one of these. When you start for the second box, the one in the middle, you have to continue counting with where you left off. So you would count 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then you have your second fact. And then you just keep going. So you would just keep going with 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and then you just keep filling it in. So that could potentially help you. I'm not going to fill out all of it, but if you really kind of see what I'm doing here, I'm just skip counting, and you would get all the way through your 9s, because I mean if you're looking here, that'd be times 1, times 2, times 3, that would be times 4, times 5, times 6, times 7, times 8, times 9. You'd get through your 9s and you'd have all your facts there that you might need. All right, let's go back to this problem here. 438 times 7. So I've got to know my sevens. This really is not going to be anything different from the 2x1. We just have one extra step. And so we're going to start here with 8 times 7. 8 times 7 is 56. So I'm going to carry the 5 to my next step. 7 times 3 would be my step 2. 7 times 3 is going to be 21 plus that extra 5. That's one of the things, especially when you're multiplying by some bigger numbers and you're carrying, you have to make sure that you don't forget about what you carry. So 7 times 3 is 21 plus an extra 5 is going to be 26. I'm going to carry to my next position here, or my next step. And then my last step would be my 7 times 4. 7 times 4 is 28. 28 plus an extra 2 gives me 30. And so I'm going to complete this with my final answer now of 3,066. And so just a couple of tips there on some facts practice. If you had some issues with some multiplication facts, like when I was a kid, I know 7s were difficult for me. So like knowing, hey, if I could write out all my 7s and I can have them in my tic-tac-toe box there, that could be with me the rest of the year. And then eventually you're going to look them up so much you're going to start memorizing them. So there's your 3x1 practice. It's kind of just a review for you. All right, on this page, I'm going to cover a 2x2. So this probably would have been the hardest thing for you as a 4th grader. This would have been probably the biggest problem that you would have had to go face as a 4th grader. Your teachers could have pushed you. You maybe went a little bit further than this. But usually this is going to be the highest that you would go and really have to have mastered before you leave 4th grade. So I'm going to come up with 54 times 25. And so on a problem like this is going to change a little bit. And so let's kind of stop and talk about how this is going to change. I think it's really important for kids to understand when they see a problem like this, automatically I would want my students to stop and think, okay, well, there's going to be more work involved on something like this. I'm going to have to really stop and kind of think to myself what the process is going to look like, what should my answer look like at the end. And I'll kind of go back to that at the end of this video, but it's one of those things where, again, if I stopped and I looked at this problem, I'm already thinking to myself, all right, I have to really know 2 facts here. I have to know my 5s and I have to know my 2s. And if I know my 5s and my 2s, I should be fine on this. Something else I might want my students to think about is, all right, really, if I break this down correctly, I really am just going to be doing a couple of 2x1s. That's all this really is. Eventually I'm going to be doing 54 times 5, and then also 54 times 2. I would say probably the hardest thing about a 2x2 that from 4th grade is remembering the setup and how it should look. So let's talk about that. And again, I'm going to go traditional here. I'm going to stick to the traditional algorithm. All right, so let's start here and let's think about the ones place here. Let's just think about really that 2x1. It's going to be 54 times 5. So I'm going to start with 5 times 4. 5 times 4 is going to be 20. So I'm going to carry a 2. Then I'm going to stay on my 5 and I'm going to go across. 5 times 5 is 25 plus an extra 2 is going to be 27. And if I kind of just stop here and think about what I just did 54 times 5. If you did that problem by itself, you would have the answer of 270. Now here's the issue that I think a lot of 4th graders run into, and really a lot of 5th graders as well. When you look at this problem, you have to stop and think, okay, well, what's really happening here? And I'm going to write some stuff out to the side. So you just accomplished this problem, and you got the answer of 270. What you have to really stop and think about, though, is your next problem, what you're really, if you were to break this down, what you're really doing here. Your next problem would essentially be 54 times 20. And so here's the issue that a lot of kids run into. When they're setting this up and they're working a 2x2, if they're going to do it traditionally, which is what we're doing on the left side of the screen, they forget about what's called a placeholder. And this allows you to basically, if you're going to stay with traditional algorithm, this allows you to not show as much work, and it allows you to kind of cut some corners, so to speak, and kind of keep everything nice and neat and not have to go and break it down like I'm showing you over here on the right side. And so this is how I teach my students, and there's different ways and there's different methods, but I'm going to share with you how I teach mine. And it's kind of silly, but I do think it helps kids remember. And I got this from my wife, and she taught me this when she had been teaching math for a while, and she shared this with me. I thought that's kind of interesting. So I always tell my kids on a 2x2, when you have 2 digits at the bottom, you have to think like a chicken. And so it sounds kind of silly, but I think it'll click. And you know what? If it makes sense and it works, why not use it? So if you think like a chicken lays an egg. So your egg is going to be a 0, or it's going to be the placeholder. But a chicken also scratches, and they kind of, walk around, they scratch the dirt and stuff like that. So when I mean scratch, I'm going to scratch out a couple of numbers here. And the reason why I'm going to scratch those out is because those numbers don't come back up again. I've used them, they're done. And so now when I stop and I look at this problem, there's something from earlier that I said was, basically you're just going to be doing 54 times 5, which we've already done, but you're also just going to be doing 54 times 2. Because if I look now, the problem that's left is just 54 times 2. I've scratched the other two numbers out. And so I think this next step will get some kids, and that I'm going to kind of circle it here with my pen. You have to make sure you do this, or else it just doesn't make any sense. I always tell my students to retrace their steps. So if you retrace your steps, the first thing you did with the 5 was you did 5 times 4. Well, you have to retrace your steps now with the 2. When you get to that 2, you got to retrace it backwards and go, okay, really, I'm going to do 4 times 2 at this point, which is going to give me 8. And then I'm going to keep going. I'm going to now go 2 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. And so now I have a couple of numbers down here that I want to go and combine. I don't have an answer yet, but I'm getting really close to getting one. So, believe it or not, if I look at my page here and I really kind of put together what I just did, I just found both of these answers. I just found them in a more, in my opinion, just in an easier way. Doing the traditional algorithm, I feel like, is the easier way because all your work's right there in front of you. You don't have to break it apart like you do on the right side of the screen. The left side of the screen, it's pretty much right there. We're ready to get an answer and see what the final answer is. And so I'm going to combine my zeros here. 0 plus 0 is 0. 8 plus 7 is 15. I'm going to carry a 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. I'm going to drop that last 1, and I'm going to write it out to the side here. It looks like I have a final answer of 1,350. And I'm done. I've accomplished everything I needed to do. I basically have completed a 2x2. And so I think what's important here when you are practicing these, it's probably just going to be remembering a couple of things. One, you got to remember if you're multiplying by a 2-digit number, you have to have that placeholder, or what I called an egg. And so I'm going to circle it here in red. It's just, you got to remember that, because if you don't have it, it's not going to be right. In fact, a lot of kids, that's what they do in my class. They want me to come over and look at their work. That's the first thing I'll look for, because if it's not there, it's going to be wrong. The second thing is retracing those steps. So I'm going to circle them again here in red. And so I think a lot of kids, when they get to that point after they've laid that egg or they have that placeholder there, they want to go straight up with that tens place. So like on this problem, they would want to go from 2 to the 5 and do 2 times 5. And so you got to learn, you got to retrace your steps. Everything you did with your ones place, you have to go and copy that with your tens place. And so just a couple of things to think about. Probably the best advice I could give you, other than just knowing your facts, is just practice. You got to practice these things. If you want to get good at 2x2s, you have to practice them.